Thank you once again for joining us today. You were one of the first people I even reached out to regarding to the Becoming Off-World Late Together community before I even created the community. So you have been aware of this for quite some time. But for those of you who don't know Michael Gallagher, he is a doctor, the assistant clinical professor at the University of Alberta in Canada. And I don't want to read your bio because that tends to be boring. So I want you to talk about who you are, a little bit about your background, if you'd please.
Yes, certainly. So yeah, I've and actually since more recently moved to University of British Columbia. So similar sort of similar sort of, they changed it from assistant clinical professor to clinical assistant professor. So it's pretty much about the same. But yeah, so my day job really is as a family physician. I was trained in rural family medicine and spent a lot of time in southern Alberta in Canada, and then up in Yellowknife in the Northwest Territories as part of my training. And my connection to space really started, my formal connection to space started in 2010 when I was selected by the Canadian Space Agency to do an aerospace medicine elective at Kennedy Space Center down in Florida. And, really that kind of set a course for these next several, I guess it's now been about 12 years of really, being, fairly heavily involved personally in, trying to push the space industry forward in a really unique way. And I got to see Space Shuttle Discovery launch and land at that time. I saw Atlantis get rolled out to the pad. I got to touch Space Shuttle Endeavour. It really, it was kind of at about that time where I thought, wow, this is going to be part of my life for a little bit longer. So than a year. So here we are.
Awesome. So you talked about how you worked at Kennedy Space Center in that area. How did your love of space even get started?
Yeah, well, and I think like a lot of kids, it's fairly typical. You see the space shuttle launch on TV. It's incredible. You hear stories about the moon landings, and you see footage of that. Probably something that crystallized even more kind of my interest in space was going to the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago. I lived there for a year, and just I think seeing all the different exhibits on space and really kind of getting a bit of an understanding of just just how difficult an endeavor that is, and just how exciting it can be, and how much it can inspire a lot of different people, really had me kind of go more on that trajectory. And I think that year I kind of when I was in grade 6, I wanted to be a pilot and an astronaut. And then the next year I wanted to be a brain and a heart surgeon. And I think, a few things pulled me in different directions. Like, okay, well, politics is interesting. Okay, other parts of medicine are interesting.
And I just look at all the hard stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I kind of just, I think in university I tried to keep an open mind. I think, coming from Canada, I always knew it was such a rare thing that people ever got to be involved in the space industry. So that kind of waned for a little bit. And I thought, okay, well, I should probably focus on other things. And then I got this letter from our dean sent out to all of us that said, hey, the Canadian Space Agency is looking for 3 Canadians to be to do these aerospace medicine electives, these 1-month aerospace medicine electives. And I thought, well, I may as well just try. This probably won't happen. And wow, my gosh, it happened. So that kind of reconnected me to say, okay, well, this maybe there's some things that are still possible here. And I think when we look and see what's happening in the commercial space industry, that also, I think that's also made me think a little more about saying, well, maybe there's more possible here, and maybe there's more possible for people who never would have thought they could be part of the space industry. And so that's kind of why I've spent the past 12 years really trying to continue to be part of this and trying to improve the access that people can have to the space community, because I know there's a whole lot of talent out there, and there's a whole lot that can be, contributed to the space industry to push it forward.
That ties nicely into the Association of Spaceflight Professionals. So tying normal people, non-astronaut, non-government astronauts into spaceflight. So can you tell us a little bit more about ASP?
Yes, absolutely. So, and as you mentioned, the organization was formerly called Astronauts for Hire. It was started by some folks who had applied to the government astronaut programs, the main ones: ESA, Canadian Space Agency, NASA, and so they had said, they thought, okay, well, we didn't quite get in to be astronauts, but is there a way that we could make ourselves useful and able to participate in the commercial industry as commercial astronauts? And so the focus very much was on saying, well, how do you make yourself qualified enough to be to get an astronaut job? And really, it turns out that that's also extremely difficult. And certainly at the time that it was started, you had a lot of ups and downs in the fortunes of flight providers at that time. And so when I took over the organization after having been a member since 2011, I thought, well, maybe what we need to do in this pioneering spirit of the commercial spaceflight industry is maybe we need to focus not on how do we get ourselves jobs, but how do we create these new jobs where folks will be required to go into space, because the research they do or the type of technology that they develop demands that a human go into space to actually develop a scientific concept and understand something more fundamental about the universe, or develop a piece of technology that just, where you need the space environment to be able to prove it out effectively. So, yeah.
Sort of like you're developing your own private payload specialist roles. Does that sound right?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Now, for those of you who don't know in the audience or listening to this after, so the payload specialist role and the mission specialist role were created at NASA, I think in the 1980s. Correct me if I'm wrong there. But I believe the first commercial astronaut payload specialist was Charlie Walker, who was paid by his company to go to space. So he wasn't NASA selected, he was company selected, and his company sent him twice in the 1980s. So in a sense, that's what Association of Spaceflight Professionals is trying to do, right? Has it evolved since that beginning?
Well, yeah, and actually it was neat, and I know Laura, you and I have gone to the Next Generation Suborbital Researchers Conference, and it was actually wonderful to meet Charlie Walker there briefly, and so yeah, that very much is the business model for us, and so our key question is, I think we've really stayed on that course, and I think the key thing we're really trying to do is figure out, okay, well, how do we do this more effectively, and how do we kind of level up in a sense to really start to expand these opportunities for everybody? So principal part of our work over the past several years has been engaging with engineering student teams at the University of Toronto to be able to develop various different types of prototypes that could fly in space. And to give you some examples, there is existing space technology called lower body negative pressure that basically counteracts what's called the fluid shift in space, where when astronauts go into space, there's no gravity, or I should say, pardon me, correct yourself, you're weightless. There's still gravity acting on you. You're just in orbit, so you don't feel it. And so fluid shifts to the head. And so the lower body negative pressure devices bring that fluid back to the legs. Traditionally, it's been used as a cardiovascular countermeasure, and they're looking to see if it might be able to be used to help help mitigate the vision changes that happen in astronauts. So to get back to what ASP is trying to do, we were working with somebody by the name of Dr. George Pantelos, who created a design for it in the 90s and tested a basic prototype. And we said to the students, hey, try and improve this and see if you can make it more lightweight, more comfortable, more collapsible. And so so that's one piece of technology we've looked at. And then there's one called an auto transfusion device, which is basically got an idea for it when I was working in a small town in Alberta where there's a full hospital there, but a lot of the towns have either only a small amount of blood or no blood at all, if in case somebody's coming in with some kind of trauma. So you actually have to call a hospital to get them to bring blood with them. So so I thought, well, there are these devices that exist in operating rooms that are kind of bigger and require a tech. Wouldn't it be nice if you could make something that's smaller and simpler that could be used not only in space, if somebody has a trauma in space, but also on Earth in some of these small rural towns. So put those ideas to some of these University of Toronto teams as well. So so really kind of what we're looking at doing is, I think where the stage that we're at is, I think the model is still good. The question now becomes, okay, you can get to a certain level with these. You can get some components built. You can get some very interesting concepts and designs. But to reliably get these to a level, these prototypes to a level where they actually need to then start to be validated in a microgravity flight and a parabolic flight on a jet aircraft where you're getting 30 seconds of weightlessness, or even as you get to suborbital, 3 to 4 minutes, or you get to orbital, you need to, there's a little more that's needed. So very much this year, we're trying to kind of look and say, all right, can we do some more fundraising? Can we get some government grants? And through that, I think then, as these technologies progress and more people are required to help validate these technologies in relevant environments, i.e. jet aircraft, suborbital flights, orbital flights, I think then we start to create more of these jobs and roles for folks who will be able to then go into space one day.
That is awesome. And as someone who is on the planning committee for the Next Generation Suborbital Researchers Conference, I'd be remiss if those of you who are interested, it's returning after 3 years this February, March, Broomfield, Colorado. So go check that out and just Google NSRC suborbital. And so you can be a commercial payload specialist in a sense on an orbital flight or a suborbital flight. And there's lots of different types of science you can do in orbit and in suborbit. And you bring up an interesting point of using the technology that we develop in space for the benefit of life on Earth. And that is something that we can hammer home to those people who say, why do we spend all this money in space when we've got all these problems on Earth? Because a lot of the technology developed in space can benefit life on Earth. So do you have any other thoughts on that, or any other ways that you're trying to use your own, either personally going to space or ASP members or the technology and projects that you're working on to benefit life on Earth?
Yeah, well, and I think with the auto transfusion device, that's probably the most direct way that that particular technology developed in space, or that we're trying to develop for space, can also be in a parallel way developed for Earth. Something I've been interested in, and this was something that when I went to Kennedy Space Center, I kind of looked into a little bit because I had a bit of interest in bone loss in space and that sort of a thing. Was there have been various different animal studies that have been done many years back that have shown that if you put something called a tourniquet around the limb of an animal, either a rat that's kind of suspended up on its legs, or other animals, you actually can see that the area below that tourniquet that's kind of putting a little bit of pressure around the limb, you actually start to see increased bone formation. And so I became kind of interested to say, okay, I'm sure that this isn't I'm sure this isn't the whole cause for why astronauts lose bone in space. I'm sure the fluid shift isn't the only reason. I think it's probably more likely to be from exercise. But I thought, wouldn't it be, is it possible that fluid shifting to the head away from the legs might be contributing in some way to the bone loss that you're seeing in astronauts? And is it possible that lower body negative pressure might also help with regards to bone loss? Now, when we get this, so you know, that's very much describing a space problem, but also there are people on Earth who get osteoporosis, and it's a big problem on Earth. And we do have a number of different drugs, and there have been more that have been developed over time. And so, but I mean, they're still not perfect, and no drug ever is. But it's something where I look and say, you know, are there more tools in the toolbox that we could have that might be able to help solve this problem? And so I'd be interested to see if, you know, this is an example of, if we're kind of developing this technology for space, if we also kind of look into this bone loss issue on Earth and perhaps look at lower body negative pressure as a possible solution. You know, might that be an example of where we're translating something that, you know, was created for space, and then maybe using that to benefit somebody, you know, folks with osteoporosis on Earth in a unique way? And that, again, that's not proven yet, but it's an interesting question that I think needs to be answered more. And so, you know, we're looking forward to seeing how we can do that.
Yeah, Donna in the chat says that would directly apply to her. So that's great that this being worked on. My first job in the industry was working at CASIS ISS National Lab, where I was on the physical sciences side, but on the, you know, my counterparts on the biological side, we're looking into things like this, the medical research that you can do in space to benefit the people right here on Earth that have all of these medical issues that we need to, you know, work on solving, and all of that connects together. But let's back up and talk a little bit more about ASP. Who's involved? How many people? Who can apply? Who can be a member?
Yes, yeah. Well, anyone can be a member, and if you want to be a member, you go to www.spaceflightprofessionals.org and you can sign up. Generally, we run a large range of folks. A lot of us are, you know, kind of early career professionals, early to mid-career professionals. There are some folks in engineering. There are a few physicians. Our first president was a geologist. There are, you know, and there are a few folks who do work at NASA, and there are also students who are involved too. So I think what's really neat about it, and I think, you know, one of the things I've really enjoyed about, you know, leading and being part of ASP is that space everyone talks about in academia kind of, you know, we need to be more interdisciplinary, and we need to have, you know, we need to be working across our various different professional lines and that sort of thing. And I think what's really neat about space is that, I mean, the difficulty of working in that environment demands that you have all of those people from different backgrounds coming together, professional, academic, personal, coming together to really be able to come up with novel solutions that allow you to operate well in that environment. And so it's been very neat to kind of, you know, be in a group with a bunch of people like that who are very interested in space and are trying to actively work to be part of pushing the commercial space industry to new heights.
Fantastic. And how often do you meet? What types of projects, aside from the ones you already mentioned, are you working on, and how are you working on them together?
Yeah, we meet we have general meetings every month. We do have
Saturday, right? Or was it last Saturday? Shoot.
Yeah, it was last Saturday. And then, I mean, certainly our executive team meets to kind of go over more operational stuff. We've also got kind of some sub meetings. We've had some wonderful folks who've joined us and are working very hard on a review article for lower body negative pressure, and looking at applying for a few grants. We did have something called the Space 101 lecture series last year that Shauna Pandya was instrumental in spearheading. And so when we look at some of the different projects, another thing that we engaged a student team on was that we were trying to help them further develop something that had been created a while ago called basically an in situ resource utilization device where you would convert carbon dioxide to oxygen using Martian regoliths. So it was a really interesting project that we hope to kind of bring to a more prototype level by engaging with the University of Toronto. Actually, the project that's made it the farthest is something called a free-floating locker, which we have tested in a microgravity flight up in Canada at the National Research Council last year, where I mean it's kind of a double contained prototype that is meant to be able to help people conduct fluid physics experiments while reducing basically, something called G jitter, which is something where the device would shake, and so that just helps you get a lot better results for fluid physics experiments. So yeah, that's a bit of an overview of a bit more what we're doing and kind of how often we meet in some of our other activities. So.
Great. Yeah, I'd love to hear more about that Mars oxygen experiment and how that compares to MOXIE. But we do have a question in the chat I want to get to. Chris Sandley asks, what do you think will be the health concerns of extended stays on the moon?
Good question. So, I think, and a lot of folks who've been at, who work at a lot of the government space agencies have said it really well with regards to how does space affect the body, and space is actually pretty hard on the body. In fact, you probably would say it makes you age really, really fast. If you were to look at a lot of the, just to sum up the changes that happen, your bones do start to get thinner, your muscles do start to waste away, your heart does start to get a bit smaller. There are these vision changes that happen to you. And it can happen to different folks depending upon some of their physiological makeup and everything. But really, it's kind of all of those things with extended stays on the moon. Now, moon has a little bit of gravity, so you would expect maybe compared with a similar amount of time on the International Space Station, maybe you get a little less of those effects of bone loss and muscle loss and that sort of a thing. But really, you're getting a lot of the a lot of what I've mentioned happens because of having less gravity present than on Earth, and also, you've also, when you look at the moon, you don't have the protective magnetic field and atmosphere of the Earth that that protects you from space radiation. So certainly, when you look at long duration stays in space, space radiation has been cited as a huge issue for that needs to be overcome.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I know we've been doing these studies for decades, but hardly anything on reduced gravity. So whether that's artificial gravity space stations or the moon or Mars, Mars is closer to Earth, but still not completely there. It'll be interesting to see how these all turn out. For those of you in the audience right now, you can ask questions via the chat as Chris just did, or if you would like to unmute or open your camera, you should be allowed to. I should have enabled that for everybody. So just go ahead and do that whenever you think of a question. But meanwhile, I want to know, Michael, what are the biggest challenges and also the most rewarding thing about running ASP?
Yeah, well, I think the certainly, again, bringing together a bunch of folks from different backgrounds and hearing a lot of their perspectives and learning more about space in a really kind of organic and interesting way has been really quite amazing. And I think the other thing is that, especially when I kind of thought about taking this role on, was just kind of saying, well, and especially at that time, and I think it's changing now, but really, there's, I think people are excited about space, but I think there's a bit of a barrier in a lot of traditional organizations to actually crossing over and saying, yes, I can actually be actively part of that. And so, I remember when I did a research project for my residency program, and it was on basically dealing with what are called epidural hematomas in rural settings. And what that is if somebody, say, hits their head, some people can get a bleed in the brain. And so I was looking to kind of say, okay, should somebody in a rural setting intervene at that stage, and would that save lives or not? But I also, as part of my write-up for it, my final write-up, I thought, well, I'll maybe put a sentence in there just because I'm interested in space. If this could have applications for long duration exploration missions on the moon or Mars. And my preceptor said, oh, no, don't put that in. So it was interesting to kind of see that it's still, for a lot of organizations, seen as, okay, well, yeah, it's exciting, but don't be careful where you include it and how you include it. So it's nice to be part of an organization that kind of says, okay, look, we're a nonprofit. We can be driven by the fact that we've come together and we've decided that this is important. And so it's nice to be able to say, okay, there are lots of people who who have a lot to give and a lot to contribute to the commercial space industry, and yes, that does include them doing meaningful work in space. And by in space, it actually means actually flying in space. And so it's really neat to be able to say, okay, look, we're going to try and make a beeline for this. We know it's hard. We know it is a big challenge. We know that it's far from certain or guaranteed, and there are a lot of obstacles, but it's worth it. And even if we weren't to make it, there's a lot of benefit that can come out of it. And I know how excited a lot of folks from the University of Toronto student teams got about being able to be connected with the space industry. And I really do think that being able to just say, I think, again, and probably this would be my favorite thing, is to say, all right, well, it's wonderful to lead an organization where we've all said, this is important. Yes, it's hard, but we're going to do it anyways. And we're going to give a whole bunch of effort towards it. It has been probably my favorite thing about it.
Great. Yes, I can somewhat relate to that. Here at Becoming Off-Worldly Together, it's a community of like-minded individuals who want to go to space, astronaut hopefuls, whether that's the government side, the commercial side, no matter where they're from. We've got members from around the world. And it's just bringing everybody together and knowing that it's a safe space for people to gush about space, about admitting their desire to go to space in a place where people aren't going to naysay them or make fun of them. It's one of those sort of almost a support group of people who say, yes, this is what I want to go do, and how are we going to go do it? And I can relate to that being something very rewarding, is to have that group come together. And for those of you watching who are not members, I know that some of you are, then you can go to becomingoffworldly.com and learn more about the community. And you can access the recordings from previous guest speakers, and this one will be up as soon as it's done. And every month we bring up experts like Michael who can talk to us about going to space, preparing to go to space. And in fact, that's my next question. Michael, any advice for people who would like to go to space as a commercial payload specialist or commercial astronaut who just wants to wear some kind of bracelet that measures vitals, something as simple as that? Any advice for them?
Well, and I think it's one of those things where, yeah, this is such a new area of exploration for humanity, in a sense. I mean, as you'd mentioned, it was Charlie Walker a while ago, and we've kind of had little drips of commercial space activity, and over these past few years, we've had a bit more of an acceleration. And maybe, as you and I know from our many years of attending Next Generation Suborbital Researchers Conference, we said, oh, the inflection point will happen now. No, maybe it'll happen now. And maybe it actually is starting to happen now. So, I mean, I think with regards to commercial astronaut stuff, again, I'm not I haven't been to space yet, so I certainly want to just make that known to folks. So I'm like you very much in terms of being able to trying to be able to be in these different communities to try and understand from folks who've actually gone to space what it's taken, and so I think probably from the commercial astronaut perspective, it would seem to me like it's very much about kind of keeping your eyes and ears open to opportunities, but even more than that, it's actually then starting to say, okay, well, what might be needed on those flights, and what might other organizations want from people who are going to go on those flights, and trying to then say, all right, well, what skills and knowledge do I have that is going to be able to, what skills and knowledge do I have that will help me be able to be part of that? And I think a philosophy I've kind of looked at for myself is again, yeah, there are so few kind of government astronaut positions, and wow, there, in many cases there's a reason for that. They're gonna, they want to have people go to Mars, to the moon, that sort of a thing. But I think what's neat about the commercial space industry is and the space exploration in general, is it might actually be one of those key cases now in a world that's getting a lot more full, with a lot more people, where resources are becoming, maybe a little more limited. It might actually be one of those truly non-zero sum environments where you can say, well, look, if I can do something that gets other people into space and being able to fly and being able to do meaningful work, well, wow, if these really talented folks are able to go, maybe by virtue of some of their work, eventually one day, maybe I might be able to go. And so those are, I think there's space in the commercial astronaut realm to think that way. And I think if we are able to achieve that, then these opportunities will become a lot more prevalent for a lot more people.
I feel that over the past 5-ish years, I've seen more and more of my colleagues either fly or get selected to fly or purchase tickets to fly. It's one of those things that's becoming more real almost by virtue of who I'm surrounding myself by. And so being part of groups like Becoming Off-Worldly Together, like Association of Spaceflight Professionals and others, we can then be influenced by the people who are working towards these goals, and then by the people who do make it. And knowing that as access ramps up, as cadence of launches ramp up, then more and more people will have that opportunity around the world. It won't be limited to certain governments. Like here in the United States, flies a lot more astronauts than the Canadian Space Agency, than the ESA. It won't just be limited. And of course, there's other limitations as well. But commercial space industry is opening it up to people who have, long thought that they couldn't, and now they possibly can. So I love that. Any audience questions? I don't want to leave anybody out of the conversation. I'm curious to know in the audience if there's anyone here who wants to fly to space and has any, medical questions for Dr. Michael here, or anything about Association of Spaceflight Professionals, or anything that you just want to say. Meanwhile, yeah, I'm so sorry. Go ahead.
Well, I think it looked like I wanted to maybe it looked like Thomas maybe had a question about underground moon bases.
Oh gosh, Thomas, I didn't even see that. Yes, thank you.
That's all right. So for underground moon bases, it's an interesting concept, and I do remember I did the space studies program at International Space University, and there were some folks who were talking a little bit about that. And I think part of the concept of that was to be able to mitigate some of the space radiation concerns that would happen. So to my mind, it sounds promising. I think someone I would defer to is as anyone who's an expert in space radiation, who can say, all right, well, how deep would a moon base have to be? How effective is lunar regolith at shielding from the types of radiation that cause problems, be it gamma rays, galactic cosmic radiation, that sort of a thing. But I think to answer your question in a sentence, Thomas, it sounds promising, and I think there's a decent chance that it could help improve the health concerns of deep space exploration.
Yeah, Thomas, that's a good question. I know that people are looking into lava tubes on the moon and that kind of thing, that naturally is a place where we could maybe hide from the radiation environment. And there's also the dirt and dust that gets levitated from the electromagnetics. It's just a messy environment altogether. You don't want to breathe that stuff in.
Yeah.
Not
Well,
that you
and
would be in a spacesuit, but
yeah, yeah. Well, and I think, when we look at health concerns, and to my mind, I mean, the number one thing that I think we see is, yeah, that weightlessness. And when we look at those parallels between space and Earth, it's really interesting to kind of get the perspective for my own work in medicine. And we kind of say to people, okay, you need, good diet, good exercise, good social relations, and that's a foundation of health. And I would say, well, let's add another thing: diet, exercise, and gravity. It really comes to saying, all right, well, what are key things that, I mean, I think you need in space? And the one thing I think I wish that a moon base could solve is, well, is there a way to get is there a way to be able to either do certain exercises that really get you back to what gravity provides you naturally on Earth, or is there a way to create gravity in a better way, either more probably on what you'd be looking at more on a deep space exploration mission when you're flying to Mars, but also it'd be interesting to see if anyone's ever come up with anything that might might simulate increased gravity on the moon that might help improve health issues that could happen.
Yeah, that'll be fascinating to find out. I look forward so much to Artemis and what comes out of that, and all of the different other concepts in the Moon Village Association, all of those that just, it's going to be so interesting to see how it all evolves. Any last minute questions for Michael? Are you following the Artemis program? And Donna has a question after that. So, Michael, are you following the Artemis program?
Well, yeah, a little bit. I mean, it's. I think it was interesting. We had a bit of a discussion with regards to. I know there've been a few kind of launch delays and that sort of a thing that have taken place, and yeah, I think. I mean, everyone's very, very excited to kind of see everything get to the next stage, and to kind of see people back on the moon and back on the moon to stay. And I think during one of our discussions, actually at our general meeting last week, a fellow by the name of Mustafa really put it well, which he's been doing his thesis related to space exploration on the moon. He said, for Apollo, we were looking to go there and come back. And that's different than going there to stay. And so that means there are a lot more moving parts and a lot more complexity that go into things. And I mean, not only that, I mean, regular launches are delayed because of weather. So when we look at space, I mean, it's interesting because I mean, yeah, space is sometimes we like when you're watching an Olympic athlete playing a sport. They often make it look easy. And when we look at launches and we look at other things, we see, okay, beautiful launch, rocket goes in, doesn't, it's become routine. But what's really interesting is just how difficult and uncertain and hard and, we'll be frank, dangerous it can be. And just how many things have to come together to make that go well. And so, and I think, in many cases, it takes guts to say, okay, it takes a lot of guts to launch a rocket. It also takes a lot of guts to say, okay, we're not there today. People are going to be disappointed. We better scrub this because we don't want things to go wrong. So.
Yeah, we've seen recently with the Blue Origin incident that it's not always perfect, and that crew if there had been a crew on board, would have gotten back safely. But still, it's far from routine. It's far from air travel, and there's no hurricanes on the moon, but there are hurricanes here on Earth, which prevents us from going to the moon right now, because the SLS rocket got moved back to the VAB this morning, and unfortunately the earliest opportunity I think is November 12th to launch that Artemis 1 mission that we're really looking forward to. So we have at least 2 more questions here in the chat I want to get to. Are there any reasons, like someone like myself, Donna is asking, who would want to join, I think she's talking about join ASP, even if I'm retired and would not have an active part in the organization?
Well, and I think Don, I mean that's I think that's a good question. I think it's very much I think a personal choice in terms of yeah, where I mean it's wonderful that now I think you're in a realm where you're able to say wow, I have this time and I want to devote it to things that I'm really interested in, and I would also hope that we would you would know that we would certainly welcome you into our organization, and that I would hope that if you're facing any sorts of barriers to feeling like that you could be active in the organization, I hope that. I hope that we could let you know that yes, you would very much be valued, and we would very much appreciate your thoughts and insights and everything about our activities and how we how we can move forward. I'd love to know more about your background, because I think we have a few folks in our organization who are in a similar spot as you, and certainly I very much welcome their insight and guidance and advice, and again, it really depends on where you would like to go, and certainly for ASP, our goal would certainly be to have folks who are able to who are able to participate in some of our activities. I mean certainly if it's something where you're wanting to kind of learn a little bit more about space, I mean we can certainly offer that too. I think what Laura's doing is incredible in terms of just being able to bring folks together and really have that regular cadence of people conveying a lot of the current knowledge in the space industry to this wonderful network and becoming off-worldly. So I'm really glad that you're part of Laura's organization, and I think if your goal is also to just learn a lot about space, I mean I certainly think it's great that you're part of becoming off-worldly, and I hope you continue to be part of that too. So.
Thank you, Michael, for those kind words. And thank you also for being a member of Becoming Off-Worldly Together. And we do appreciate Donna. She is a very active member, and definitely appreciate her participation. Thomas asks, what do you see as the biggest obstacle someone would have to face to get to space?
Fair enough. Well, I think, when I was, and this is part of kind of having my interest rekindled in space exploration back in 2010 during that elective, I met with Irene Long, who was chief medical officer there at Kennedy Space Center, and there's such an excitement that I thought, oh wow, maybe this little long lost dream of maybe becoming an astronaut is coming back. So and I'm sure she'd probably had 1,000 elective students come in and say, hey, I've got this secret. I want to be an astronaut. Oh my God! I'm like, I'm in my late 20s, and this has come back again in terms of, or sorry, say my my late 20s, and I was kind of thinking, yeah, I want to do this. But she said it was very interesting. She said, astronauts are smart people who can be called upon to do anything, and so. When we look at, I think barriers, certainly health can be a barrier. So that's a big barrier for some folks. And I hope with the commercial space industry that barrier is coming down a little bit more, because certainly some of the commercial providers are very interested in flying folks who may have money but might have some hypertension or may have the start of some coronary artery disease. And there certainly have been some studies that are going on with regards to flying those folks safely. So that may start to bring that obstacle down a little bit more. I do think that there's an investment of time and an investment in kind of the right area of expertise that folks need from people in order to be able to be an effective crew member. So being willing to commit to getting those experiences and being able to build upon, your knowledge base and your experience base to be able to be part of these sorts of programs. I think there's an element of luck, certainly for the government programs, and I think right now probably a bit with the commercial programs as well, in terms of being able to be part of that. Right now, I think, and Laura alluded to it as well, there is a bit of a citizenship barrier with regards to some of the big space agencies and their astronaut programs and that sort of a thing. I do know a number of folks who have traveled to a country that has a space program, have nationalized, have gotten that citizenship, and are really working hard to be astronauts. So I think there are definitely a lot of obstacles, and I guess the other obstacle would be money. And I think right now we're getting into a phase that if you have enough money, well, there's a solid chance you can go. But yeah, I think the good news is those barriers are starting to come down slowly but surely. And I think a key thing that we can all be part of is figuring out how do we, in our own unique ways, bring those obstacles down so that, not only can we fly one day, but we can help a lot of other people fly too.
Yes, opening those doors. I'm all about that. So my third book, which I've already started, is going to be about opening up spaceflight to people with disabilities and working with Mission Astro Access and some other folks who are looking at different ways that we can accommodate people with different disabilities to open up spaceflight to the rest of humanity. And that might be someone who has a temporary disability because of a medical condition or a permanent disability. I mean, like, there's so many things that right now we exclude people when we really need to bring people together and include them for the future of humanity in space. I don't know if there are any last minute questions from the audience here, but I do have a question for you, Michael. If you could go anywhere in space, where would you go?
Oh, good question. I've got two lovely little nieces who I've been, it's been just such a privilege to be part of their lives and everything. And it's funny. I thought, sometimes there's just, fun elements of imaginative play or whatever. And my niece Arden has a little astronaut suit and that sort of a thing. And actually, it's funny enough, I think my grandma made it for me, like, years and years and years ago, and she's wearing it now. And I thought, okay, well, everyone goes to the moon or the Mars or whatever. I was like, we should go to Europa, Arden. Let's go to Europa and let's go and see if there's sea creatures beneath the ice. So yeah, that's been a fun little destination. And then I could like pull up Solar Walk on the phone and show her Europa and like show her other parts of the solar system. So yeah, it's good fun.
Hopefully it won't be a killer asteroid from whatever that movie was, or killer, like, what was that? A sea monster, an octopus. That's what I meant from that movie, underwater Europa.
I think I remember. And was the movie title? I think that was a while ago.
So the Report? I don't remember.
Oh, was it? Okay, I
don't remember. It was years ago.
I think I have flashes now that you've mentioned that in my memory. Like, I think there was something with tentacles and something related to space. So yes, okay. I should just.
But hopefully, Europa Clipper will help us figure out if there's life under the waters of Europa. That would be amazing. I agree. I think a lot of those moons get left out of the conversation. Yeah. I would love to go visit them as well.
Yeah, well, and I mean, Hollywood has an incentive to make scary movies, and we have a natural fear to things. So hopefully there's the supposedly killer octopus underneath the Europa Ocean that's giant is actually a friendly, misunderstood giant that really just wants to connect and is actually very intelligent. So maybe that will happen, and maybe there'll be a movie made about that.
I'm hearing that you want to be an astrobiologist on Europa. That's what I'm hearing.
Well, maybe I'll leave that. I mean, I've kind of gone down this whole medicine route, but I mean, I guess I could change in my 40s, have a little midlife crisis or something like that. Not quite 40 yet, but maybe I should leave that to Arden. I mean, there's actually, it's nice because Vancouver Island has got some of the best scuba diving in the world. So, scuba is a great analog in a lot of ways for space. Maybe she'll just do an elective at Banfield Marine Research Station, and that'll, then she'll think, wow, maybe there are other environments kind of like this, and then maybe maybe she might, and never to push anything on her, but hey, maybe she might want to be an astronaut. Maybe she will be one of the first folks who sets foot on Europa. We talk about the Mars generation. Maybe she'll be the Europa generation.
There we go. We're doing this for the next generation. Thank you so much, Michael. This recording will be on the Becoming Off-Worldly Together community. So you can go to topics and then guest speakers, and you can see all the recordings from the previous months that we've had guest speakers. I want to thank you so much. Also, we are resurrecting our blog. So as soon as I get a chance, I will write up a summary of this talk and post it publicly on our blog for you to share if you wish. Thank you all for joining us. Thank you for those who are part of the community. And also for those of you who are not yet part of the community, go to becomingoffworldlytogether.com and come join us and join Association of Spaceflight Professionals. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for the privilege, Laura. I really appreciate it. It's an honor.
Thank you. You all to have a wonderful day.
Take care.